All the way from the start, I can feel it in my heart, like all the way from the start.
Hey, what's going on out there? I'm Sean Devine. Hope you all are doing well. Today I've got a new video where we're going to talk about using limiters in the mixing process. This is by request. Many of you are just asking, what are the scenarios and situations that I'm using limiting in mixing and not just on the stereo bus. We are going to talk about how I use maximizers and limiters on the stereo bus, but I'm also going to show you some other things and just kind of give you more of an idea of when we're thinking about the proper time to use limiters as opposed to just turning up the gain on certain tracks in your mix. So let's go ahead and play back this track first. This has some really loud drum elements. Let's take a listen, and then we're going to talk about some of the different limiters and maximizers that I'm using and why I'm using them in this session.
Riverside. If we ain't eating, then we cutting ties. Mashallah, we forever ride. Notice me, I ain't begging nobody, you gon' notice me. All this hard work I done put in, you gon' notice me. Man, I put the on God, you gon' notice me. Man, I do it for my daddy, that's a bet. That's a bet. And I do it for the family, that's a bet. That's a bet. Man, I put that on my brothers, that's a bet. That's a bet. Look at how they got me beating on my chest. On my chest. Man, I do it for my daddy, that's a bet. That's a bet.
All right, so some heavy transients in here. Let's start by talking about the maximizer or the limiter that is on the master bus, which is ozone, and I typically will mix into a limiter or a maximizer in my mixing process. I've talked about this before, and the idea here is that we want to go ahead and just put the true peak right below 0 and just park it. And so we can mix into this, and this accomplishes a couple of things. Number one, it's going to keep you in check and prevent you from, really pushing the stereo bus too hard and getting, distortion, unwanted things there, especially when you're going to be exporting this out. But more importantly, we're going to go ahead and be able to listen to what's happening when we're hitting, this limiter or maximizer, and we're getting our true peak detection, and we're having that attenuation. So this is going to alleviate a lot of guesswork, so that whenever you do get to the mastering stage, or if you're doing it in the same session, you already know kind of how this maximizer or limiter is going to react to your mix. And you're going to be doing this at some stage anyway. So I'd rather just go ahead and put it on there. And again, just put it right below 0 dB true peak and know what's happening. So I do that in pretty much all my mixes these days. It's just generally good practice. Not required if you're, mixing things really low. But again, I always say, why would you not just go ahead and start getting things to commercial levels in the mix? So now let's get into just the basic tracks within the mix, not the stereo bus. How are we using limiting? Well, first of all, I like to use limiters on the loudest elements in my mix because, again, I'm usually mixing pretty hot. So things like my kicks, my snares, sometimes the 808, different percussion elements, even sometimes synths that may be a little bit loud. I like to use limiters to keep us from pushing the channel too hot. I'm not really as worried about clipping if it's just a little bit, but it is good practice just to keep it just below 0, just so that we're not overworking the stereo bus and presenting some issues once we get down here to this channel with too many channels that are overloaded. So for instance, the kick and the snare in this track are both run through an L3 Ultra Maximizer, which is one of my favorite limiters from Waves. It's very loud. I have this profile called Loud and Proud, and it's just extremely transparent. I've got the threshold pulled down just a little bit. So both of those are being mixed currently at commercial levels, and I'm able to do that by using these limiters. We can push the level without it really, overloading and clipping the channels like that. So drums, it's great. but I will caution you, you want to be careful about which limiter you choose, especially on your drums, because, we work so hard to get those punchy and dynamic, and not all limiters are created equally, and they're not going to have the same effect on your drums. So choose one that's quality. Something like the L3 is a great option. So let's move down here. I have an aux track set up for my instrumental or the beat, and I like to do this in most sessions so that I can process the instrumental. And a lot of times in this style, the tracks and the beat are going to be mixed very loud. So I want to go ahead and just limit these, all of them together. So down here, we're dealing with the tracks individually, and we're kind of doing some preventative measures with those L3s. But as all that stuff comes together, if the beat overall, all those levels are pretty hot too, then I'm going to go ahead and just, keep these just below 0, all of it again. And this is so that once we get down here with the vocals being mixed in and all that other stuff, we're not overworking everything. So this is not changing anything in terms of the sound. It's just keeping us just below 0. And you can hear a slight amount of clipping happening. So you've got 2 modes here for the IM pusher. You've got the clip mode and the limit mode. I'm not going to talk too much about these here, but clipping is fundamentally different in that the waveform is actually clipped off when it goes above that, and it gives you a different sound. I've found that clipping allows you to get a louder, more aggressive type of tone versus limiting. We're attenuating things to keep it below 0 rather than clipping, and it gives you more of a compressed sound, and it does affect the dynamics differently. So be aware of that as you see certain limiters these days with clipping versus limiting modes. Maximizers, a lot of those, it's the same kind of thing. So there is a fundamental difference between those, and I just want to point that out. All right, so the last thing I want to talk about with using limiters in the mixing process, this is something that I do all the time. You see it in a lot of my vocal chains, is I will put a limiter as the last plugin in my vocal chain. And this is just a very useful practice that is going to keep you, once again, from pushing the channel too hard, especially when we're trying to get that extra bit of just an upfront, louder tone out of the vocal. I just have found that putting a limiter rather than just using the gain, because sometimes, we'll start clipping, and again, different plugins kind of react to that better than others. So if we put a limiter here, for instance, here I have this at, minus 0.5 ceiling, something like that. And then we're just pulling down the threshold a little bit.
Do it for my daddy, that's a bet, that's a bet. And I do it for the family, that's a bet, that's a bet. Man, I put that on my brothers, that's a bet, that's a bet. Look at how they got me beating on my chest, Man, I do it for my...
So when I activate that, again, we're just bringing that vocal up just a little bit more, and we're doing it in a safe manner. All right, y'all. So we covered a few different scenarios of when I'm using limiters in the mixing process. So it's not just on the stereo bus. It is a great way of preventing, unnecessary clipping and pushing individual tracks too hard, but also just giving yourself a little bit more control going into the stereo bus and allowing you to get louder in this process, the mixing process. Many of you out here are mixing really quietly because you don't want to clip and you don't want to push things too hard, and then you're relying on all the limiting on the stereo bus, when you can actually use limiters throughout the mixing process to go ahead and get that level, get that loudness. And then, we don't have to do as much heavy lifting at the very end. Hope this helps y'all. If you have any questions about using limiters throughout the mixing process, feel free to leave a comment below. If you learned anything in the video, please like, subscribe, and consider sharing. We'll talk to you soon. Teach them something that they might not have known. I'm sitting here drinking ginger tea 'cause it's real, man. Stay conscious as we run. My flow is